Why is she here? The question wasn't loud but sharp enough to cut through the polished air of the wedding. I didn't have to turn around to know whose voice it was. The groom's mother, with the same sneer she wore years ago, like only her bloodline belonged under the chandeliers of Langston Hall. I kept walking, steady in my Jean Vito Rossi heels. My turquoise gown hugged my figure, its train gliding across the red carpet. It was a custom piece from a boutique in Manhattan, worth 3 months of my ex-fiancé's salary. But I wasn't here to count money. I was here to make sure they could never look down on me again, not even with a glance. Every eye turned toward me like it had been choreographed. Some looked away quickly, others whispered. The rest just stared, frozen, like they'd seen a ghost. Next to me stood Grant, my husband. He held my hand, resting the other lightly on my bare back with effortless poise. 50 years old, tall, silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes. The kind of man who had led hundreds of international deals without a single leak. He was Grant Whitaker, CEO of Worthington Capital. The same man who once fired Mason after a closed-door meeting. Yes, Mason, the groom. The same man who once looked me in the eye and said, "Athena, I can't introduce you to my family. You don't belong in my world." And now, not belonging, stood at the center of the Henderson wedding hall, arm in arm with her husband, eyes fixed on the newlyweds standing by the ice swan sculpture. I saw Mason's face the moment he saw mine. The champagne glass in his hand tilted, his face drained of color in a single breath. He said nothing, just stared, panic in his eyes, at Grant's hand resting confidently at my waist. The bride, Rachel, about my age, blonde curls floating in a cloud like Vera Wang gown. She looked me over, her brows knitting instinctively in defense. She didn't know who I was, but her intuition told her something was very, very wrong. I stopped a few steps away. A server offered me a glass of champagne. I took it with a slight nod. My eyes never left Mason. "What's wrong with you?" Rachel whispered, her hand resting on his arm. He took a slow breath and turned to me, smile trembling like a magician realizing the audience had seen through the trick. Grant leaned in, whispering just loud enough for the two of us to hear. "They're about to do their first dance. Want to stay for the show?" I curved my lips into a smile. "Of course, I've waited over 6 years to be invited to this performance." A man in a charcoal suit approached us. It was Mr. Edward Langston, chairman of Langston Industries, the man Mason and his family had been desperately trying to impress. He paused when he saw Grant, his eyes lighting up. "Mr. Whitaker? I didn't expect to see you here." Grant shook his hand, polite but reserved. "We're here privately. Athena knows someone from the bride's family." Instead of answering, I gave him the same smile I once reserved for people who underestimated me. And that silence alone made Mason step half a pace back, as if I might spill a secret that would ruin everything. "We meet again, Mason," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but clear enough for Rachel to hear. "Congratulations, she looks just like your mother." Rachel's face blanched. Mason's knuckles whitened around the glass. I raised mine and clinked it against Grant's, eyes locked on Mason's unraveling expression. "To a long and happy marriage." 7 years ago, I lived in a ground-floor apartment no bigger than Mason's garage. The windows were cracked, the faucet dripped, but I kept it clean. I worked from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., changing uniforms in the McDonald's restroom, then rushing to the night shift at a corner store near the train station. I was 23, studying finance at a community college in Brooklyn. Each semester was a battle not to top the class, but just to stay in it. Mason knew all of this. He used to say he admired me. He once brought me to his penthouse, the one his parents gifted him right after graduation. I remember one fall evening, sitting with him on the balcony, when he said, "You're the first person who's ever made me feel something real." I foolishly believed that real was enough, that if I kept striving someday I'd blend into the velvet halls and whispered power plays of Henderson galas, as his equal not his secret. That night I had prepared a small dinner, cooked it myself with tips I'd saved all week. I even splurged on a bottle of Italian wine more expensive than any I'd ever dared buy. I was going to tell Mason I'd just landed an internship at Whitmore and Blake, an elite investment firm, just a research assistant role, but to me it was everything. I lit candles, set the table like it was a holiday. because, to me, it was a turning point. Mason arrived late. No text, no explanation. When he knocked, the clock read 8:10. His face was unusually serious. I thought something had happened at work. "We need to talk," he said, standing at the doorway, not stepping inside. I was still holding the wine glass, untouched. "What's wrong?" I tried to keep my voice steady. He glanced at the table, then quickly looked away, like it might change his mind. "Athena, I don't think we should keep doing this." My fingers clenched around the glass, steadying everything except my heart. "What did you say?" "I talked to my parents today. They think you don't fit." "Fit?" I repeated, almost laughing. "I'm going in a certain direction in my career, you understand?" Mason avoided my eyes. "There's image, standards, and you—" Set the glass down, afraid my hand might tremble. "Say it, Mason. I don't come from money. I didn't go to an Ivy League school. I don't qualify as a promising young entrepreneur's girlfriend, right?" He sighed. "Athena, don't turn this into a tragedy. I was trying to help you. That internship at Whitmore? I'm the one who made the call." "You made the call? You think you got it on your own? You didn't have an impressive resume, no referrals?" "I just wanted to help you out of the world you were trying so hard to escape." His voice was gentle, but all I could hear was one thing. Every effort I thought was my own achievement was just a favor from Mason. I stood still, every word searing into me. "If you were truly good enough, you wouldn't have needed my help." That was the moment I knew there was no room left for dignity in this love. He left without touching the food, without congratulations, without looking back. When the door closed behind Mason, the dinner I'd made with hope was now just a prop in a room that suddenly felt too quiet, too small. After that night, I didn't cry anymore. Not because the pain had vanished, but because I understood. I no longer had time to shed tears for someone who had trampled my pride. I stuffed the dress he once called beautiful into a trash bag, took down every photo of us with my own hands, burned every handwritten note I used to treasure like keepsakes. And then I started over. I applied for an internship at a small financial analytics firm in Lower Manhattan. Clarion Analytics. The office was old, the computers slow, and the payroll couldn't even cover a dream vacation. But there, no one knew I used to be Mason Henderson's girlfriend. There, I was just Athena, the girl who didn't mind staying up all night crunching numbers. I lived on instant noodles and cheap coffee, took weekend shifts at a stationery shop near the subway station. But every night, I opened my laptop and quietly began a new habit. Reading everything I could about Henderson Capital, Mason's family company. I studied financial reports, tracked personnel shifts, read insider leaks on investment forums. I didn't know exactly when I became truly familiar with that company, but I knew every weakness in their market expansion strategy, knew they were using outdated supply chain models, and knew exactly why Mason wasn't fit to be CFO even if his father tried to force it. It wasn't about revenge. At the time, I didn't know what to call that feeling. I just knew I needed to understand the system that once pushed me out, so that next time if I faced it again, I'd be ready. Not like the night I watched him leave, silence choking me more than words ever could. One Tuesday afternoon, just as I was about to leave the office, Kyle, a teammate, hurried over to stop me. "Hey, rumor is, someone from Worthington's board is coming for a surprise visit this week." I froze. "Worthington Capital? You mean our parent company?" "Exactly," Kyle whispered. "Word is it might be Grant Whitaker himself. If that's true and you managed to impress him?" I already knew what I had to do. For the next 3 nights, I didn't go home. I requested access to unprocessed market analysis data and completely rebuilt the risk assessment report for the renewable energy sector, the same sector Henderson was trying to break into. But instead of just numbers, I reconstructed their entire financial model, compared 3 competitors' acquisition strategies, and attached an appendix highlighting the flaws in the Singapore project Henderson Capital had just invested in. I knew I was taking a risk. The Singapore project was still being praised in the press, but I saw the operational costs ballooning while revenue couldn't keep up. If I was right, it was a flaw no competent CEO would ignore. The full report was submitted with the weekly materials that Friday afternoon. No one noticed my name on the contributor list. I didn't tell anyone I had done 4 times the required work. By Monday morning, I was called to the 12th floor, a place interns rarely set foot in. The conference room was unusually quiet. At the head of the table sat Mr. Grant Whitaker, holding the very report I had written. "You're Athena Hale?" he asked, eyes sharp as blades, but not harsh. "That appendix on Henderson Industries was yours?" "I personally handled the data and built the financial model," I replied, keeping my tone even. Mr. Whitaker leaned forward, tapping a finger lightly on the table. "Your projection shows the Singapore project will go cash negative next quarter. What's your basis for that?" I opened my laptop, pulled the data, and pointed out 3 key indicators, including an internal operations report from an Asian supplier I'd found through a niche industry forum post. No words followed, only a quiet nod that said more than anything he could have added. "That's the first analysis in 3 months that hasn't wasted my time," he said with a faint smile. "I'll remember your name." 3 days after that meeting, I received a short email from Worthington Capital's main office. "We invite Miss Athena Hale to interview with Mr. Grant Whitaker, Monday, 9:30 a.m., floor 28. I must have read that email at least 10 times, each time my heart racing, as if I were walking into a competition where the prize wasn't just a job. It was my self-worth. The interview took place in a glass-walled room filled with sunlight. Grant didn't ask standard questions. He just handed me a delayed report and said, "If you were me, what would you do?" I talked about reverse analysis strategy, leveraging data from secondary suppliers and holes that even their internal teams hadn't noticed. He stayed quiet, listening, nodding occasionally. After 45 minutes, he stood, extended his hand. "We need people like you. But I have one condition." I looked up. "No perks, no shortcuts. You won't start high. You'll begin in an independent department, reporting to someone else, not me." I laughed. "That's exactly what I want." So I became a mid-level analyst in the mergers and restructuring division. No one knew I'd sat across from the CEO. No one knew he was the one who occasionally invited me for coffee after work, asking about my studies and my thoughts on how the company was run. We worked together on several projects without ever revealing any personal connection. Grant never showed favoritism, and I never asked for special treatment. It wasn't until a year later, on an evening when I had just closed a complex restructuring deal that many had deemed unsalvageable, that he called me up to the 31st floor. Not to discuss work. "I waited until there was no one left who could say you got here because of anyone else but yourself," he said, placing a red velvet box on the table. I paused, then lifted the lid. Inside was a ring. Unassuming, but quietly beautiful. "I know what people will say if I say yes," I said bluntly. "They'll claim I married you to climb the ladder." "Then let them talk," Grant replied. "While they're busy gossiping, we'll run this company better than anyone else." I said yes, not because of the ring, but because this man understood I didn't need someone to lift me up. I needed someone who could see my worth without the filter of bias or background. After we got married, I continued working under my original name, Athena Hale. I didn't move into an executive office. I didn't ride in a chauffeured car. I still walked into meetings with decks I prepared myself. Still stayed the last one in the office when a deal got tough. There was a time when a senior advisor, Mr. Harold Blake, publicly questioned me during a meeting. "We're letting a 30-year-old woman who's never run a company handle merger data worth tens of millions?" I didn't argue, I just worked. 3 months later, it was Mr. Blake who called me into a private room after the San Jose deal made headlines. "I was wrong," he said. "You spotted what the entire research team missed. You saved us from a massive loss." I shook his hand and quietly replied, "I don't need praise, I just need no one standing in my way." From then on, Mr. Blake became one of my strongest advocates on the strategic board, and for the first time I felt like my work wasn't being dismissed. For the next 3 years I never spoke the name Henderson, but with every step forward, I knew one day they would speak my name and lower their heads. I don't remember the exact moment I realized Henderson Capital was digging its own grave. Maybe it was when I reviewed the second quarter balance sheet of an intermediary firm in Dallas where Henderson had quietly acquired shares to conceal real losses from their Tucson plant. Or maybe it was when I discovered 2 operational reports from their Singapore branch, one sent to investors, one internal, mismatched by over 40% in just 3 months. Whenever it was, I knew this. They had made the same mistake I was once blamed for. Not being good enough. Grant once told me, "In business, if people think you're better than them, they'll keep their distance. But if they think you're weaker, they get careless." Henderson Capital thought I'd disappeared. That the girl who once wore a restaurant uniform and was left alone at a cold dinner table would never rise strong enough to touch the one thing they considered untouchable: the financial power of their family name. I built a reverse merger strategy over 8 months, hidden beneath a subsidiary based in Delaware, North Astor Holdings. We started with secondary debt, mainly Class B corporate bonds issued to fund a wind farm project in Nevada, a venture that had never been as profitable as they claimed. I had teams renegotiate bad debts, quietly acquire portions of interest from minor creditors. Bit by bit, 1% at a time, we gained deeper access to their operating cash flow without Henderson ever noticing. The final blow came from Singapore, where Henderson had invested in a renewable battery plant, hoping to compete with 2 European giants. But instead of optimizing costs, they were trapped in raw material contracts at twice the market rate. Because the project lead was Mason. Mason didn't understand that temporary deficit coverage through offshore funds still left accounting trails. I waited for the perfect moment. And it came sooner than I expected. 2 weeks before Mason's wedding, I received an invitation from Henderson sent to all potential strategic partners, including Worthington Capital. They wanted the wedding to be a networking stage, a display of power, a symbolic union of 2 families, reaffirming Mason's status in the business world. What they didn't know was that stage would be where the curtain would fall. I handed the invitation to Grant. "Do you want to go?" I asked calmly. He looked up from his folder. "I don't, but if you're going, I'll go with you. I've waited 7 years for this moment. I'm showing up." The night before the wedding, I presented the full acquisition strategy for Henderson Capital via debt control at a Worthington board meeting. I used data, risk analysis, internal supplier files, and even evidence of Mason's financial report manipulation. When I finished, the room was dead silent. Grant looked around, then spoke. "Mrs. Athena Whitaker has just presented a plan that is not only brilliant, but accurate down to the last detail. I propose appointing her as Director of Mergers and Acquisitions for Worthington Capital, effective immediately." No one objected. I signed the appointment papers with a steady hand, not a single tremble. No one saw it coming. Not Mason, not the people who once deemed me unworthy of a seat at the table, let alone the head of it. I simply prepared a special dress, chose the earrings Grant had given me on our first anniversary, and the next morning I walked into the wedding of the man who once told me I didn't belong. Not as a guest, but as the person holding the power to determine the future of his company. I raised my champagne glass, gently clinked it with Grant's, then walked toward Mason and Rachel, the newlyweds still frozen beside the swan ice sculpture. Mason was the first to react. "Athena," he said softly, as if changing his tone might bring back the loyal girl who used to serve him dinner. I smiled, stepping forward. Not rushed, not arrogant. "Hello, Mason. Congratulations on your big day." Rachel tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "You two know each other?" Before Mason could respond, I answered, my voice light as air. "We were together for nearly 2 years. I was the woman his family never invited to dinner." Rachel flinched, eyes darting to her new husband. "You never mentioned dating her." "It wasn't serious," Mason said quickly, sweat forming at his temples. "It was just the past. The past when you attended my mother's funeral and asked to move in with me," I said without raising my voice. The space around us froze. A few guests nearby started glancing over, pretending to sip wine while clearly listening. Rachel straightened. "You told me there was nothing to worry about, that the company was stable, that it was all rumors." I stepped closer and pulled a silver-embossed business card from my clutch, handing it to her. "This is the legal office number for Worthington Capital. If you'd like to verify anything before your honeymoon turns into an emergency board meeting, I think it'll come in handy." Rachel took the card, her hand visibly shaking. At that moment, Mr. Henry Henderson, Mason's father, approached. He looked significantly older, but his eyes still held that arrogance I remembered from 7 years ago. Mrs. Whitaker, he nodded. I didn't realize Worthington would send someone today. I wasn't sent, I replied. I was invited, with my husband. Grant stepped forward at the perfect moment, placing a hand gently at my back. An unspoken but undeniable affirmation. And let me guess, Henry continued, forcing a smile. You're here to threaten us? I tilted my head. I'm here to offer congratulations and to inform you that our firm has officially acquired the majority of Henderson Capital's outstanding debt. His face drained of color. That's impossible. I'm afraid it's true, Grant spoke up. We completed the transaction through North Astor Holdings, a Worthington subsidiary based in Delaware. The acquisition was finalized this morning. This is some kind of hostile takeover? I call it strategic restructuring, I said with a smile. And the fact that Henderson Capital failed to notice is part of the internal problem. Mason stepped in, his voice rising. You're trying to humiliate my family at my wedding? I don't have to try, I said calmly, still holding his gaze. Your family did that themselves, by appointing an unqualified CFO, concealing losses from Singapore and issuing uncontrolled bonds. I just happened to be the first to see it. Rachel turned to Mason, her voice trembling. Singapore? You told me that project was profitable, that you had every risk under control. I tried. You know what? I cut in. I used to believe in those words, I tried, and they cost me everything. But now, no one has to believe them anymore. Rachel stared at her new husband like she was seeing who he really was for the first time. She still held my business card, and her eyes? Those eyes no longer belonged to a happy bride. You can't do this, Henry snapped, face flushed red. We have relationships, partners, a board of directors. And I have numbers, I replied. Numbers don't lie, don't care about connections, and certainly don't care who wore the better wedding dress. At that exact moment, one of the wedding media team's cameras swept past and caught the scene. A coordinator rushed over, but it was too late. The room fell silent. I turned to Grant and whispered, "Shall we go?" And just like that, I walked away from the wedding of the man who once believed he'd always be above me. I didn't need to ruin the celebration. They did that themselves with their own arrogance. 3 months after the wedding that every business magazine dubbed the biggest PR disaster of the year, I stood on the top floor of Henderson Capital's former headquarters. The room where Henry Henderson used to sit, where he approved deals with smug nods, was now empty. The Golden Eagle statues were gone. So were the power maps. In their place, sunlight, silence, and half-sealed boxes. Mason and his father had been removed from executive positions just 2 weeks after Worthington Capital's official takeover. The reason listed in the documents? Failure of financial oversight and severe damage to shareholder value. But everyone knew what that really meant. They were ousted by the very system they built to shut others out. I didn't sit in Henry Henderson's old chair. Instead, I chose to work from a small office on the 3rd floor, once the HR department, because from now on, people, not legacy, would be the core of this place. I proposed converting the Granite Midtown headquarters into a mixed-use development, with affordable housing for workers, a job training center, and a free co-working space for small businesses. It passed after 3 tough board meetings. Some opposed it, suggesting we sell the property to a luxury developer. But I asked one question. Then how are we any different from the old Henderson Capital? I personally contacted Mr. Robert Franklin, a veteran manufacturing engineer whom Mason had demoted to warehouse supervisor, simply because he didn't have an Ivy League degree and didn't fit the culture. When I called, there was a long silence before he asked a question that made my chest tighten. You really want me to come back? Not just come back, I answered. I want you to oversee the entire production line for the clean tech park we're building on the vacant land south of the plant. I thought I'd been forgotten. No one deserves to be forgotten just because they don't know someone on the board. The day he returned, the entire factory seemed to come alive. Workers who once felt invisible now looked at him with respect. They saw hope in the way he held the schematic and walked young engineers through each step. And I saw a reflection of my younger self, quiet, persistent, and underestimated. I hosted an internal gathering, no flowers, no champagne, just sandwiches and a fresh analysis report on screen. I didn't need a mic. From this point forward, I said, every decision about personnel, promotions, and product development will be based on ability, not on who you know or what brand of suit you wear. A week later, I received a handwritten letter from a warehouse worker, Elena Martinez, who'd been pulling double shifts to raise her 3 kids. In the letter she wrote, "For the first time in my life, I feel like I have a chance to step out of the cold storage room and into the meeting room. Thank you for allowing people like me to dream." I folded the letter and placed it in my drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. I once dreamed of sitting at the table where decisions were made. Now the dream is bigger, to create more seats for those who were never invited. One Thursday afternoon in mid-autumn, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line was simple, about the wedding. It was from Rachel Henderson, Mason's ex-wife. She wrote briefly, "No justifications, no blame. Athena, I thought you should know. Mason and I are officially divorced. Not because of you, but because of the things I tried to ignore from the beginning. He finally admitted everything, about Singapore, about the company, about you. I'm sorry for how my family treated you at the wedding, and I truly hope, that what you're building helps women like me wake up before it's too late." I read that last part over and over again. There was no resentment, no request for forgiveness, just a woman who, at last, had seen the truth. Everyone needs their own journey to reach the place I once spent so long trying to get to. 2 weeks later, I returned to the community college I once attended at the invitation of the business department. They asked me to speak to the graduating class, students struggling with tuition, part-time jobs, and self-doubt that felt all too familiar. I stepped onto the small stage in a plain white blouse and light gray slacks. No diamond earrings, no mermaid dress, no outward signs of success. I told my story, unfiltered, about long shifts at restaurants, about being dismissed, ignored emails, and rooms I was never invited into. I didn't talk much about Mason, because he wasn't the point anymore. I spoke about the pain of having your worth decided by others based on where you came from, how you spoke, or what college name was on your resume. After the talk, a student came up to me. Small frame, soft curls, sleeves worn at the cuffs of her coat. "Mrs. Athena," she whispered, "how did you know you were good enough?" I studied her face. The uncertainty, the quiet hope behind her question, as if seeing my 20-year-old self. Those same unsure eyes. Not until the day I stopped looking for someone to confirm it, when I stopped waiting to be validated and started walking on my own terms. That's when it no longer mattered if I was enough, because I knew I was myself, and that was enough. She nodded, her eyes shimmering. That night, riding home, I looked out the window at the city, lights still glowing in high rises, young people still walking fast toward dreams they might not yet dare to name. Grant gently squeezed my hand. "You spoke beautifully today." I tilted my head onto his shoulder. I'm no longer angry at Mason. No bitterness about the past. "I know," he said. Outside, a light rain had started to fall. But inside me, everything felt calm. Athena's story isn't just about overcoming pain. It's proof that your origin doesn't define your worth. Once dismissed for being not the right fit, she redefined what it meant to belong, with skill, perseverance, and integrity. She didn't seek revenge. She built a better world where merit comes before bias. Her triumph wasn't in taking anyone down, but in lifting others up. What do you think of Athena's journey? Was she right to respond with quiet strength and fairness, instead of vengeance? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about life and family.